I'm Colton Fox, the creator of Witch Hazel Variety Hour, and you're listening to True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Colton Fox about his new comic book, Witch Hazel Variety Hour, and tips on making comic books. Please like and subscribe to this website by hitting the subscribe button, so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Colton Fox is a writer, artist, and educator based in Kingston, Ontario. He's also the writer and co-creator of Witch Hazel. His artwork appears throughout the queer coming-of-age film Erin's Guide to Kissing Girls, and is featured in galleries, anthologies, music videos, and publications. Yet somehow he still can't pay his phone bill. Colton regularly hosts comic workshops and courses. His latest comic book is Witch Hazel Variety Hour, featuring art by Beige Blum and published by Silver Sprocket. Witch Hazel Variety Hour offers a story of Hazel, a talented spellcaster and walking disaster, where spells fizzle, side gigs go sideways, and magical villains wreak havoc. For Hazel, it's just another day as a witch for hire. Luckily, her friends, her crush, and her familiar Noot are there to pick up the pieces or make things worse. Monsters, magic, and mayhem? Hazel's definitely not getting paid enough for this. The 48-page deluxe printing features a cardstock cover with foil accents, fun activities, and a sticker sheet. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Colton Fox about his new comic book, Witch Hazel Variety Hour, and tips on making comic books. So, Colton Fox, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Thanks so much. It's good to be here.
Oh, I appreciate your time. Before we get going with all the questions, I would like to know, what was the first comic book that you read?
That's a good question. Gosh, if we're going far back, I remember there were these Pokemon comics that my sister got for Christmas, and I must have been 5 years old. And I remember finding those and just being so mesmerized by them. And I started making my own when I was 5. Before I could even really write, I would make my own little comics of knockoff Pokemon characters. And then I didn't think about comics for a long time afterwards. But then I started to get those Shonen Jump comics. I don't know if you ever saw those, but yeah, when I was in grade 5 or 6, there'd be these phone books, 500 pages of manga that'd be at a grocery store. So I would just sit down right there on the floor in the grocery store while my mom shopped, and I would just read this phone book of Yu Yu Hakusho and Dragon Ball Z and One Piece. And then I didn't get into comics obsessively until I saw the first X-Men movie, and I was so obsessed with Wolverine. Yeah, obsession is the only word. I was what was his backstory? Because where if you remember, his memory was wiped. So well, where did he come from? How did he get the claws? And so eventually my mom was I don't know. I don't know. So she dropped me off at a comic store one day. And so that was the start of the rest of my life. From there, I would just buy X-Men comics, and then I got into the $1 bins. So that's when I got into all the obscure characters, some of those Image characters like Darkhawk or Dark Shadow or Dark something. And that was basically the start of all of it. So that's the short version of what my first comic was.
That's amazing stuff. Yeah, I remember those big Shonen Jump, those big, huge telephone books, as you say. That was amazing stuff. And good inspirations growing up, but I'm wondering who or what inspires you to create today?
Nowadays, I'm so busy, I don't have time for inspiration. I just have to make stuff. But I guess things that kind of fill me with creative energy is just seeing just what's going on in the industry today. I feel there's so many great new creators that are doing really interesting things with the medium. I feel for a while, mainstream comics got very kind of creatively stagnant. And I don't know if that's just a product of like me maturing and finding other influences. Like I used to buy comics, like new ones off the rack pretty religiously, but then it got to the point where I was really, I don't know if how deep some of your listeners are in the comics, but like that Secret Invasion, if you remember that, it came after Civil War. It was so bad. And I was like, for a time, like they were so good, like House of M and then Civil War. And I know that's all Marvel stuff, but I was buying comics off the shelf. And then like Secret Invasion, it was like testing how many crossovers someone would buy. And I was about like 14 or 15 when that came out. And I just remember being like, this sucks. And I stopped buying comics for a long time. And I went off to college. And then that's when I discovered like a lot of the independent creators. And I discovered other publishers like Fantagraphics, Silver Sprocket, Drawn and Quarterly, kind of the artsy fartsy crowd. I never stopped loving superheroes, but it was also really good for me to find other expressions of the comics medium. And today, like I try to find whatever is strangest. I really like, like TCAF, Canzine when that was around, and just like little art fairs and stuff. I just love to find like people who are approaching comics from a completely different viewpoint than I am and finding like how they're applying their voice to this medium, which has so many possibilities beyond superheroes.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing how Secret Invasion was your breaking point from DC Comics. I still kept going for a bit, but it was the New 52 that stopped me cold. That was the thing that broke me. But yeah, lots of great independent work out there. Every day I'm finding a new creator, and such as yourself with the award-winning Witch Hazel comic book. I wonder if you could talk about that, as a creator. How is it like to win that award?
Yeah, Witch Hazel started as a self-published series, and our first issue was voted Best Independent Canadian Comic by Sequential Magazine. It was really great to be nominated for that. I had been doing a lot of like small things, and so to get that recognition, it really meant a lot to me. So Witch Hazel, it was created with Beige Blum. So how that partnership works is I write and I do the layouts, which are like really rough pencils, basically, and I hand those off to Beige, who illustrates it wonderfully. And then we tag team the colors, and then we hire out for lettering, because lettering is one of those things that often gets overlooked, but it's like the invisible art. It's like audio in a movie. Like if the sound is bad, it doesn't matter how good the actors are or the special effects, like you're going to feel off watching it. And so we always trust a professional like Micah Myers or Matt Krotzer to make the comic look professional with their fantastic lettering. So shout out to them. But winning the award, it was a lot of fun because we wanted to do something special with it. We didn't just want to like make a post, just be like, hey, we're nominated, vote if you want to. We were like, nah, we're scrappy. We're gonna make this a fun event. And so we actually printed flyers with a QR code that people could scan to then vote. And we put those up everywhere. So I had them up all over Toronto, Hamilton, Kingston. We were putting it in like the bathroom at a restaurant and stuff. We would ask people like, can we put these up? And then most of them would be like, yeah. But then some of them would be like, nah. And we'd be like, oh, okay, cool. But then we would like put it up in like a secret spot in the restaurant or in the cafe. Just a little bit of guerrilla marketing. And it paid off. They said that like they had the most votes ever. So it really paid off. And we got a nice little plaque out of it.
Yeah, sometimes that's what you got to do. You got to go outside the box to promote yourself. We're talking here because you've got a brand new book from Silver Sprocket. Maybe we'll get into that. But the new title is Witch Hazel Variety Hour. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
With Witch Hazel, it's a little different because when we got the first issue out, we won the award and it was fantastic. And then we were wondering what to do next. And so we debated, do we want to do a proper issue 2 that follows up issue 1? Do we want to wait to see if we can get professionally published? Do we want to just do a graphic novel next? We started kind of waiting to figure out what the next move was, but then people wanted to know what happened next. They wanted more Witch Hazel. And so our follow-up issue that we did for Canzine was the Summer Spectacular. And it doesn't necessarily follow the events of the first issue. It was more like a beach episode. And that was a lot of fun, and it kind of set the tempo for the series moving forward, where it's more of an episodic series. And so I took inspiration from shows like The Office and Seinfeld, where you can watch an episode independently and enjoy yourself, but if you watch them all in order, you start to see a story forming and a direction for the season. And so we use that as inspiration for how we approach Witch Hazel. And I think that was the right move because it helped me understand tight pacing. It allowed me to explore the characters. It allowed a lot more fun stories to come from it instead of having just one story kind of dragged out over a bunch of issues. Each issue offered its own unique original experience with a complete beginning, middle, and end, but enough breadcrumbs to keep audience and reader interest. So we did Witch Hazel, the first issue. We did the Summer Spectacular. We did an issue that was sponsored by the Ontario Arts Council. So we got that grant on the recommendation of TCAF. So the Toronto Comics Art Festival recommended us to the Ontario Arts Council for funding. And that's how we did the next issue, which was Witch Hazel Trouble at TCAF. And so we decided to set it at TCAF, which was a lot of fun. And then we did Witch Hazel's Seasons of the Witch, which had all of our other comics that were web comics, ones that were in different publications, like little strips that we had done, and a full color version of the Summer Spectacular. And so that was the prototype for Witch Hazel Variety Hour, which was all of these different stories in one issue. And so around the time of Witch Hazel Trouble at TCAF, we were in talks with Silver Sprocket to put out an issue with them. And they really liked our episodic format. And so they wanted us to do an original comic with them that had 48 pages and to kind of go wild with it, which we were very happy to do. Witch Hazel Variety Hour is very much like the most Witch Hazel. Like it has 3 short stories as well as some one-pager comics. So very much like the strips that we would do. We formatted them for one-page comic that kind of gives a little bit of context for certain things. We have an activity section in the middle. Again, we just really love to play with format. So where the staples are, like when you open it flat, that's where the activity section is. It has a coupon that you can cut out that actually works. You get 10% off Silver Sprocket books. And you don't have to cut it out, but we have a disclaimer that says, you don't have to cut out the coupon, but come on, wouldn't it be so much fun if you did? You know, just my love of old comics. There's like a word search, a maze, a paper doll thing, so you can cut out different outfits for Hazel. We also have a sticker sheet in it because, again, we were having all this fun with physical marketing for Witch Hazel when we were doing the campaigning for the award. And so we also have Witch Hazel stickers and buttons that we sell at cons. So we wanted to bring that to the issue, again, just to make that physical medium of comics feel alive and that you're engaging with it. Because I feel like a lot of like the mainstream superhero comics, those periodicals, like the ones you buy every Wednesday, I feel like oftentimes they're just being written for the trade. And so it makes the single issues feel a little less special. And it's like, well, what's the point of putting out these single issues if you don't get a satisfying read on its own? And rather, like, I look at the comics from the 70s and 80s and the 60s where they were never thought to be collected. It was just the one issue. And sure, they'd have milestones like the 100th issue or whatever, but holding those old-timey comics, they felt very special to me. And I look at them as like art objects, and especially like in the independent crowd where they don't have the privilege of putting out an issue every month. So those single issues often feel so special and unique. And so I wanted to bring that appreciation for physical issues to this new one by having the interactive elements like the activity section, like the sticker sheet, like the gold foil that's on the cover.
It sounds like there's a lot packed in there, that's for sure. I got to ask you, though, as a creative professional, when you go from an independent book that you self-publish to a major publisher like Silver Sprocket, were there any ups and downs in the process?
The ups were that we got to make the comic exactly the way we wanted to. There was no compromise. If anything, we took it as far as we could because with the creative side, we didn't have any notes really. There was nothing like we couldn't do. And we also like our tastes are fairly tame. Like we don't want to have anything like visually upsetting or anything like grotesque or off-putting. That's just not really where Beige and I's interests lie. That's not to say like we don't want to have heart and tackle serious things. Like the first story in Witch Hazel is a mix of heart and magic and comedy, but there is also like a poignant message about like, relationships and being taken advantage of. We're not afraid to get real, but we don't get any delight in something like, offending people. Though some people might find things offensive. Like, for instance, I was saying the other day, like one of our stories that was in Seasons of the Witch is called Fishmas, where it's like in this universe, they celebrate the first fish that walked on land that would evolve into a human. And it was only in like retrospect that I was like, wow, that could actually upset some people. Like, I never even thought of that. I just was like, Fishmas is a funny idea. Yeah, that's the extent of, and also the fact that Hazel is a queer woman of color, like that could offend some people. Those are people that maybe I'm not too worried about offending. Back to the question, yeah, we were able to get everything we wanted. And I think the one thing that we may have had a little bit of a pushback on, but we got, was the price. They wanted to make it $11.99 US. And I was like, this is going to be put in Canada. With that US to Canadian conversion, this is going to be too expensive. It has to be $9.99. And they were like, what? Like, we won't make any money. And I'm like, it's got to be $9.99. I'm just feeling it. Isn't that like a nice price, $9.99? And they're like, oh, geez, all right. So we got that $9.99. It is $9.99 US. So there is still a bit of that Canadian conversion. But I think that for the foil cover, the sticker sheet, and 48 pages of comics, it's still a pretty good deal.
Yeah, that's a great deal for sure. Now, you mentioned this already, and I just want to go back really quick to go back to your process working with Beige Blum. You had already done some issues with Beige. So I'm wondering, was this like getting back into the routine? Was there anything new there? Or was it just like, here you go, Beige, and let's get her done?
Yeah, we never really took a break because we did the TCAF issue. So the timeline goes in 2022, the first issue came out. And then in 2023, the Summer Spectacular came out. And we were a little bit slow in 2023 because we were figuring out what the next steps would be. So we pitched it around. And then in 2024, that's when Trouble at TCAF came out. That's when Seasons of the Witch came out. And that's also when we began work on the Silver Sprocket issue. So we were already, we talk pretty much every day. There was no like kind of break from any of the projects. If anything, I would like it for us to be able to do even more Witch Hazel. So I'm hoping that the future Witch Hazel will lead to us having like either a bi-monthly series or something. That we probably have to hire out for some help to keep that pace. But yeah, no, the working relationship with Beige is great. It's very collaborative. And that's something that I really appreciate working with Beige. And I think I might find it difficult working with someone that is more precious with the artwork because we are very simpatico. So like I mentioned, I do the layouts, like I figure out all the panels and I do these rough drawings inside of it. And then Beige will come back with more tightened pencils. And then I'll even draw over the figures to be like, oh, this hand isn't quite right, or oh, like this expression isn't working, or oh, like this angle, like the anatomy is off. And then I'll send it back. And then when Beige does the inks, they're returned with the corrections that I put. And so it's really nice that Beige isn't someone that would be offended by that because we're all understanding that like we're trying to make the best comic possible. And so there's no ego that gets in the way. And then when it comes to coloring, even like I'll do for this newest issue, I did all the flats and then I did the final colors on, about like 40-50% of the pages. And then Beige handled the final colors for some of the one pagers and the main story that takes up the later half of the issue. And again, there's no like ego, there's no us kind of getting into a spat over the artwork. Sometimes like we might get frustrated where it's like, oh, like we're trying to break this riddle that's coming from the colors. But there's never any ego attached to the artwork, which just makes for a better partnership and a better comic book.
That's great to hear. And I know we've been talking about Witch Hazel Variety Hour, which is launching now, but I'm wondering, do you have any other projects on the go that you can talk about?
Not particularly. It was so much work getting this one out. So I'm really excited for people to see it this Wednesday, August 20th. And then we're having our book launch at Beguiling on the day after. So Thursday, August 21st. And then we have a bunch of signings lined up afterwards. And so I always have like a couple of projects in the background that I'm quietly developing. But with the chaos of this year and getting this one to the printers and into people's hands, I don't have one that I can announce right now. But you best believe that there's plenty more Witch Hazel stories to be enjoyed.
That's great for readers of Witch Hazel. They can look forward to something in the future. Now, I was reading your bio that you also host comic workshops. You provide instructional classes about comic book creation. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's something that I'm so just happy to do. It really, teaching makes me so happy. It fills me with so much purpose and joy and reinvigorates my love for comic making. So it started, I believe in 2023, I taught classes, my first ever classes with the Kingston School of Art. So I taught a 12-week course on comic creation. I taught some mini courses, and I'd also host little workshops for different schools. So they'd have like a school field trip and they would come see me and I would teach them how to make zines and comics. But then I also taught, the 12-week course, which was for adults. And that first class was a very interesting age range. The youngest was like 15 and the oldest was 65. And then all the ages were in between. So that was a lot of fun for my first ever class. And then I kind of graduated from teaching there to hosting my course independently. So I teach it at a shop called Minotaur Games and Gifts. And they're very generous that they allow me to use the shop after hours. So it's pretty fun to like sit in a game store with the lights down low, and I have my projector and I teach the comics that way. The main thing I try to teach them all is some of the lessons that I teach about comics. It's really more kind of life in general. A lot of the times these students, they have a lot of like emotional hangups that prevent them from achieving what they want in life. And I try to really break down that barrier for them where it's like, listen, like this isn't an art problem. This isn't a writing problem. This is kind of like a problem that you need to reconcile internally. Like it's very interesting because when I teach kids, they have this raw artistic ambition and they don't really care about the quality of what they make. They don't place pressure on themselves to do something that's good. They just want to have fun. And so they get messy. They'll draw a cat with like a blue and a purple pencil crayon. They don't care that it doesn't look like a real cat. That is their interpretation. That is their raw artistic expression of a cat. And it's amazing because it's coming from this pure place. But I find that at a certain point, people get weighed down. People start telling kids that their art sucks or that like that's not how a cat looks. And then a change happens internally. And all of a sudden shame starts to get placed on artwork. And this is also something that I've experienced as well, where I would be at the drawing table just beating myself up, like just having this negative voice in my head that says like, you're not Jim Lee, like, you call this a Spider-Man, you call this a hand. And eventually at a certain point, I was like, whoa, like, why am I doing this to myself? And so I try to teach that to the students where they're like, oh, I can't do this because of this. So I can't do this because of that. And I'm like, okay, well, you keep telling yourself why you can't do this, or you keep telling yourself that you are bad. And so that's the voice that's going to be in your head while you try to make these comics and why you try to do this. And so you're going to start to find reasons why that's true. It's like a confirmation bias. You're going to be like, oh, I suck at drawing hands. Oh, I suck at drawing hands because of this. Or I'm bad at making comics because of this. But what if we try instead to say, just to correct that little voice in your head, say, I'm getting better at drawing hands. And then you'll start to look for confirmation of that. So that's why I try to teach them, like, no. Like whenever they say something to me, like, oh, I suck at doing this or I suck at telling stories, I say, no. And then I make them repeat it. And they say, well, I'm getting better at drawing hands, or I'm getting better at making comics. And then it completely changes their perspective. And it's really rewarding for myself to see that progress in class, to really see over 8 weeks someone go from the first class being afraid to make a one-page comic to ending with an 8-page comic. And it's all because of this confidence that they build up. And of course, there's lessons attached. But honestly, like there's enough YouTube, there's enough books out there that people could take it upon themselves to learn all this independently. But the class provides a structure for them and also provides that practical advice that can be applied outside of the class. I even did this to my wife. She was like, I can't parallel park. And I was like, why can't you parallel park? She's like, because I suck at it. And I'm like, okay, well, do you try to parallel park? And she's like, no. And I'm like, okay, well, let's try parallel parking right now. And then she's like, yeah, but I'm bad at it. I'm like, no. And then she's like, oh, because she's heard this a million times. She's like, I'm getting better at parallel parking. I'm like, and the only way you can get better at parallel parking, she's like, is to try parallel parking. So then we tried parallel parking, and it did go bad. But then I was like, well, let's try, a couple of minutes later, it's like, all right, well, let's try parallel parking here. And then sure enough, it was much better that time. And it's because, the mix of practice and the mix of forgiving yourself and allowing yourself, removing shame from the aspect and just allowing yourself to be like, yes, I am getting better at something that is going to require work to get there. But this destructive cynicism isn't going to benefit you in any way. And the creative prospect of creating comics or in bettering your skills anywhere else in life.
That's great advice and great news that you're sharing that with your students in your classes. So appreciate that. So with what you've got going on now today with Witch Hazel Variety Hour in your classes and whatever you got going on in the future, where can people find you online?
They can find me at Colton the Fox on Instagram. www.coltonthefox.com is my website. And that's pretty much the main place to find me.
Thanks to Colton for the chat. You can discover more about Colton Fox at coltonthefox.com and on Instagram at coltonthefox. And thank you for tuning in to the True North Country Comics podcast. I invite you to visit the True North Country Comics website to listen to even more conversations and discover how creators are making comic books and graphic novels. I also encourage you to subscribe via the website so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can follow along True North Country Comics on most social media sites, and you're welcome to send any and all feedback to John at truenorthcountrycomics.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2025.